The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Once upon a time, there were 25 tin soldiers who were all brothers, for they had all been made from the same old tin spoon. They carried their guns at the shoulder, and they looked to their front. Red and blue, their uniforms were really magnificent. The very first thing they heard in the world, as the lid was lifted off their box, were the words, "Tin soldiers!" It was a little boy who shouted them, clapping his hands. He had been given them as a birthday present, and he stood them up on the table. Each soldier was exactly like the next one, except for one, who was just a little different. He had been the last to be cast, and there wasn't quite enough tin, and so he had only one leg. Still, he stood just as steady on his one leg as the others did on two, and he it was who was to prove a remarkable fellow. On the table on which they had been put stood a lot of other toys, but the thing which chiefly caught the eye was a lovely castle made of paper. Through the tiny windows one could see right into the rooms. In front of the castle stood a lot of little trees in a circle round a small mirror which was meant to look like a lake. Waxen swans swam round and were reflected in its surface. All this was very lovely, but the loveliest of all was a little dancing girl who stood in the open doorway of the castle. She too was cut out of paper, but she had a skirt of the finest muslin and a little blue strip across her shoulders, like a scarf, and in the middle of the scarf was a glittering spangled rose, as big as her whole face. The little dancer had her 2 arms outstretched, for she was a ballet dancer, and one of her legs was raised so high that the tin soldier couldn't see it, and he thought that she, like himself, had only one leg. That would be the wife for me, he thought, but she is very noble and lives in a castle. I only have a box, and there are 25 of us in it. That's no place for her. Still, I simply must try to get to know her. And then he lay down full length behind a snuff-box standing on the table. From there he was able to watch the lovely little dancer, who continued to stand on one leg without losing her balance. When evening came, all the other tin soldiers were put back in their box, and everybody went to bed. Now the toys began to play, and they played at visits and battles and marbles, and the tin soldiers rattled in their box, for they too wanted to join in the fun, but they couldn't open the lid. The nutcrackers turned somersaults, and the slate pencil made merry on the slate. There was such a noise that the canary woke up and started to sing, and in verse, if you please. The only 2 who never moved from their places were the tin soldier and the ballet dancer. She remained poised on her toes with outstretched arms, and he stood just as steady on his one leg, and his eyes never left her for a second. Then the clock struck 12, and click! The lid of the snuff-box sprang open. But there wasn't any snuff in it. No, indeed, there was a little black goblin. It was just a sort of a trick. "Tin soldier," said the goblin, "keep your eyes off things that don't concern you." But the tin soldier pretended not to hear. "All right, you wait until the morning," said the goblin. When morning came, and the children had got up, the tin soldier was stood on the window ledge. And now, was it the wind, or was it the goblin? Suddenly, the window flew open, and the tin soldier fell head over heels from the 3rd story to the ground. That was a most terrible tumble. His legs stood straight up in the air, and he remained on his head with his bayonet stuck between the paving stones. Oh, the serving maid and the little boy immediately ran downstairs to look for him, but although they were so near him that they nearly trod on him, they still didn't see him. If the tin soldier had called out, "Here I am," they would certainly have found him. But he didn't think it was right to call for help because he was in uniform. Now it began to rain. Soon the drops fell thicker, and in the end it became a regular downpour. When the storm passed, 2 street boys came along. "Look," said one of them, "there's a tin soldier lying there. He shall go for a voyage in a boat." So they made a boat out of a newspaper, put the soldier in it, and away he sailed down the gutter. The 2 boys ran along beside him, clapping their hands. What mighty waves there were in the gutter, and what a stream! There had indeed been a flood of rain. The paper boat rocked up and down, and every now and then it whirled round and round so fast that the tin soldier felt quite dizzy. But he remained steadfast, showed no sign of fear, looked straight to his front, and kept his gun to his shoulder. Suddenly the boat shot under a long culvert where it was as dark as in his box. "Where am I going now?" he thought. "Yes, indeed, this is all the goblins' doing. Alas, if only the little dancer were sitting with me in the boat, then, as far as I'm concerned, it could be twice as dark." Suddenly there came a huge water rat which lived under the culvert. "Have you got a pass?" asked the rat. "Come on, show me your pass." But the tin soldier remained silent and clutched his gun tighter than ever. The boat sailed on, and the rat went after it. Ugh, how it gnashed its teeth and shrieked out to the bits of wood and the straws. "Stop him! Stop him! He hasn't paid the toll! He hasn't shown his pass!" But the stream became stronger and stronger. Already the tin soldier could see the bright daylight where the culvert ended. But at the same time he could hear a rushing noise enough to frighten the bravest man. For, just think, where the bridge ended, the gutter ran into a great canal. For him that was as dangerous as it would be for us to sail down a huge waterfall. Now he was so close that there was no stopping him. The boat shot out, and the poor soldier held himself as still as he could. Nobody should say of him that he even blinked an eyelid. The boat swung round 3, 4 times and filled with water right up to the gunwale. It was bound to sink. The tin soldier stood up to his neck in water, and deeper sank the boat, and softer became the paper. Now the water closed over the soldier's head, and he thought of the lovely little ballet dancer whom he would never see again, and in his ears rang the refrain, "Onward, warrior, onward, and meet death face to face." Now the paper came apart, and the tin soldier was plunged into the water, and at once he was swallowed by a great big fish. Oh, how dark it was inside the fish! It was even darker than in the culvert, and besides that, there was so little room. But the tin soldier remained staunch and lay down at full length with his gun beside him. The fish swam hither and thither. It made the most terrifying movements, and at last it became quite still. There was a flicker like lightning. Then the light became quite clear, and a voice called out loudly, "A tin soldier!" The fish had been caught, taken to market, sold, and had arrived in the kitchen where the cook cut it open with a big knife. She picked the soldier out by the body and carried him into the drawing room, where everyone wanted to have a look at this remarkable man who went travelling round in the stomach of a fish. But the tin soldier was not in the least conceited about it. They stood him on the table, and no, would you believe it? What strange things happen in the world! There he was, standing in the very same room in which he had been before. He saw the self-same children and the same toys standing on the table, the wonderful castle with the lovely ballet dancer. She still stood on one leg and held the other high in the air. She too was steadfast. This moved the tin soldier deeply, and he was near to weeping tin tears, but that wouldn't have done it all. He gazed at her, but neither of them spoke a word. Then one of the little boys picked up the tin soldier and flung him into the fire. He didn't give any reason for doing so. It was clearly the goblin in the box who was ready to blame. The tin soldier stood there in the flames and began to feel a terrible heat. But whether this came from the real fire or from love, he did not know. All the colour had come off him, and whether that had happened during his travels or whether it was because of his sorrow, no one could say. He gazed at the little dancer, and she gazed back at him, and he felt that he was melting. But he still stood, steadfast and true, his gun at the shoulder. Suddenly, the door flew open. The wind picked up the little dancer, and she flew like a sylph to the tin soldier's side in the fire. Then the tin soldier melted slowly into a little heap, and the next day, when the servant took the ashes out of the fire, all she found was a tiny tin heart. Of the ballet dancer, all that was left was the spangled rose, and that was burnt as black as a cinder.